Some Republicans who voted to convict former President Trump at his second impeachment trial are now facing backlash from members of their own party. 7 GOP senators joined Democrats in favor of conviction, but the 57-43 vote fell short of a two-thirds majority. Despite the acquittal, the vote still served as a historic condemnation of a president by fellow party members. One of the Republicans who broke ranks was Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. He's now facing a possible censure by his state party, while several county parties have already voted to do so. That includes in Washington County, where its party chair Monday accused Toomey of misleading Republicans.
We did not send him there to vote his conscience. We did not send him there to do the right thing or whatever he said he was doing. We sent him there to represent us.
For more on this, let's bring in the Washington Post's Aaron Blake. He's a senior political reporter writing for The Fix. Aaron, welcome. So what has been the fallout for the other Republican senators who also voted to convict former President Trump?
Right. So far we've seen censure votes for Senators Burr and Cassidy, who were some of the other 7 votes that you saw there. Also, Senator Ben Sasse, who has telegraphed a vote to convict the president, is facing censure in the Nebraska Republican Party. He has actually been censured previously. This would not be the first time that he has been, and he's already issued a statement similar to Senator Burr in which he essentially rebuked his own party for focusing on the will of one man, basically supporting one man over everything else. And so I thought those reactions were very significant. I think that the censure, or the looming censure of Senator Toomey is especially significant here because this is a guy who, when he was initially elected to the Senate, had basically unseated a more moderate Republican. This is a guy who headed the conservative Club for Growth years before that, who was seen as a very conservative incoming member of the Senate. The idea that he now, as he's retiring, would rebuke the president, or Republican Party president, in such a significant way, I think really drives home that for some, this became a vote of conscience over party.
So, I think, Aaron, some people might wonder, what's the practical effect of censure? I mean, you touched on the fact that when it comes to Senator Sasse, for instance, this is not his first time being censured. So realistically here, what is the consequence if a Republican is someone who is being censured, and in Mr. Sasse's case, multiple times?
Well, it's definitely a symbolic measure. There is nothing practical that it impacts. And of course, with somebody like Senator Toomey or Senator Burr, this would be something that doesn't impact them at all because they're not running for re-election. Generally speaking, it is a signal of where the party is, and maybe a signal that they would oppose them if they were running for re-election. But for some of these other members, like Senator Sasse, were he to be censured, he's not up for re-election for a long time. Same with Senator Cassidy. But these are very conservative state parties who are essentially breaking with a statewide office holder. This is a very unusual thing. We saw the same thing as well when it came to Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, who certified the results in his state over the objections of President Trump. And so the fact that we're seeing so many of these statewide Republican parties, and in some cases, county level Republican parties, breaking from the most powerful members of their own parties, I think really sends a signal that the party, at least in their estimation, the estimations of those voting for censure, doesn't want to move beyond Trump and views any vote to rebuke him as being beyond the pale.
Right. It sounds like it's very much about sending a signal about the future, as you know, the future direction of Republicans in that state, in those states. Well, Aaron, during his presidency, Donald Trump lost several election lawsuits on procedural issues, and you report that procedure is exactly what spared him from conviction at his second impeachment trial. How so?
Well, if you look at the 43 Republicans who voted to acquit the president, what I saw when I looked at their statements explaining their votes was that relatively few of them actually defended the president on the merits of the case. a lot of them emphasized the alleged unconstitutionality of the impeachment trial. Some of them focused exclusively on that subject, didn't address the merits at all. If you add up the number of senators who voted based upon that constitutionality issue, you get very close to the number that is required to prevent a conviction. So it looks as though this is a situation in which, were it not for that constitutionality issue, we would have gotten much closer to the threshold for conviction, which is 67 senators. And I think we saw that especially in the statements of 5 Republicans who voted against acquittal, who voted for acquittal on constitutional issues, but said that essentially they thought the president was culpable for the January 6th riot. And so if you add those 5 senators to the 57 who voted to convict, you get up into the 60s. You could have had a very different scenario if that constitutional question wasn't on the table. Of course, from there, the question is, if the vote was actually close, would these Republicans have fallen in line? Would they have voted on other issues and not kind of fallen back on this constitutional issue, which is a very valid question. But I think it is worth noting that while the president wants to believe this is an exoneration, while members of the party want to stand by him, if you look closely at what these Republicans said, it wasn't necessarily a situation in which they said he was blameless or even that he didn't have very much blame. A lot of them said he was actually quite culpable for what happened on January 6th.
And you wrote about this as well. What is the consequence of a ruling or a decision based solely on procedural grounds?
Well, obviously the outcome is the same as if those 43 Republicans were all voting based on the merits of the case. The practical outcome isn't any different. But I do think it matters for the broader Republican Party, and it matters when how this vote is understood, that this vote was generally on a technicality. We saw during the election challenge by the Trump campaign after the 2020 election, when courts ruled against them on procedural issues rather than the merits of the case, they often said that the courts were punting on the substance of their claims. They said that their claims actually weren't dealt with by the courts. Well, now you're dealing with a situation in which the jurors in this case, the senators who were voting on this and provided the decisive votes, basically let him off on a technicality in much the same way as the Trump campaign complained the courts were when it came to their voter fraud claims in the 2020 election. And so I think that matters when it comes to the president's election and his legacy. Does it matter to his base of support when it comes to what happens next? I'm not sure so much, but it does signal what the Republican Party actually thought about his conduct with regard to the January 6th storming of the Capitol.
All right, Aaron Blake of the Washington Post. Aaron, thanks very much.
Thank you.